Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the penultimate Speakers Corner, the Al-Emaan Centre series of live talks. We are now coming to the last nights of Ramadan and pray that Allah accepts all of our efforts, inshallah. We have been graced with some truly outstanding scholars on our online platform, and this evening we are privileged to host Brother Viqas, Sheikh, who will be discussing the topic, the Muslim, the Optimist. Before we introduce our guests, I'd like to encourage you all to post any questions on the Q&A function, which is located on the lower centre of your screen. These will be answered after the talk, along with any questions from our live YouTube stream, where recording will be available in due course. Incidentally, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and share the content with friends and family. Viqas Sheikh is a city professional and chair of the Shirley Muslim Association in South London, where he also serves as a khatib. He has been connected for many years with a number of UK-based Muslim organisations, including the Islamic Council of Europe, the Muslim Research and Development Foundation, and more recently, the National Waqf Fund. He is a graduate of the Muslim Research and Development Foundation's Sabil Tarbiyah program, which has produced a number of notable community leaders and scholars in the UK. Over the last 12 years, he has served as chair of a number of professional Muslim networks in London and is a regular khatib at various corporate Jummahs across the city. Professionally, Viqas is a fellow of the Association of Certified Accountants. Some of his articles can be found at islam21c.com. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Brother Viqas Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum, Viqas.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Amir, jazakallah khair for that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers and sisters. First and foremost, I'd just like to say a huge jazakallah khair to Al-Emaan Centre for giving me this platform, as Amir said right at the beginning as well. This series of duruus that we've managed to have, these the talks over the course of Ramadan, have truly been inspirational. There have been some great speakers along the way, inshallah. So I'm really privileged to get an opportunity to speak to you all as well. And just a quick word on Al-Emaan Centre, inshallah, a very modest Al-Emaan Centre before I go along. I've obviously known the brothers and sisters for a while. And it truly is run as a place of worship. And when we say a place of worship, we don't restrict that to Salah. We also extend that to the development of the community, a place where you will have duruus, you will be able to learn Quran, where your young will be nurtured, where you'll reach out to people who live alongside you, both Muslim and non-Muslim. And that's exactly what a masjid should actually be. Way more than a place where you're just going to go pray Salah and then come back home. It should be the hub, the epicenter of the community. And there's an amazing amount of work that's coming out of Al-Emaan. I congratulate them and I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them more tawfiq, inshallah, more ability to be able to do good work in order to seek his pleasure. Ameen ya Rabb. Okay, so the topic that I've chosen to speak about today is the Muslim and the Optimist. And the reason for that is quite clearly obvious, I would imagine. The environment that we're in at the moment, the narrative that we're getting pushed so frequently from whether it be the media, whether it be our local communities, whether it be generally everything that we're being hit with is quite sort of negative. It's almost like an atmosphere of fear. What's going to happen? COVID is right around the corner, and we're all sort of supposed to sort of stay at home, which is exactly what we should do, by the way. But equally, it's very, very important that we keep our heads in the right places. Right, and I thought that speaking to some of the Muslims as well in the Muslim community, we were getting certain, I guess, questions or certain statements that were being made, again, with quite a negative connotation. I remember there was one particular group that I'm on where we got a question about, somebody put a question on, they said, is it possible in light of COVID to postpone Ramadan? We asked, well, why would you want to postpone Ramadan? And they said, well, you know, because of Taraweeh and Iftar, etc., we're not able to do that. And I mean, my first response to that was, if Ramadan was ever going to be postponed, it would have been postponed for the Battle of Badr, or it would have been postponed for the conquest of Al-Quds, of Al-Aqsa, that happened all in the times of Ramadan. So there have been great things that have happened in the time of Ramadan. And COVID is just one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left us with. But it shouldn't impact our mindset to the point of making us insular, making us really paranoid and making us pessimistic. It's very, very important that we keep an open and optimistic mindset, because that is something that as a Muslim should come second nature to us. Now, just looking at the subject of optimism from a conventional perspective and how it's linguistically defined, I guess, in dictionaries, it's known as hopefulness and confidence about the future or the success of something. It's a very plain way of putting what optimism is, a very narrow way of putting what it is, but I guess it encompasses generally what the concept is. But in my research, I was actually really surprised to see that, I mean, we know that optimism, without a shadow of a doubt, the whole characteristic of being optimistic is seen as something very positive. It's something that's sought out from a theoretical perspective. But there's been a huge amount of research that's done around optimism to be able to empirically demonstrate the advantages of being optimistic in life and the way that it actually tangibly makes a difference to an individual. And I think three of the key things that I wanted to sort of point out that came through that research, and this is 5 decades worth of research, by the way, by psychologists. Three of the key things that really stood out were, number one, superior health of those who are optimists. And there's this concept of dispositional optimism, which effectively is somebody who is not optimistic about one or two things, not one or two things in their life. They're optimistic about everything in general, right? So their general disposition is one of an optimist. So the first thing about dispositional optimism, or optimists, I should say, is that they have superior health to others, which means that not only is their mental health better, which is pretty obvious, right? If you're going to be positive about things, you're not going to take stress. You're not going to be stressed about as much as the next person who's going to sort of keep holding on to that, whatever that worry may be, until it completely sort of dilapidates or sort of diminishes the mind into mush, as they say, right? So you let go of things. So psychologically, you're going to be a lot more healthier, but physically as well. And I think the most stark conclusion that they found over this time was those who have an optimistic mindset yet have chronic diseases, and their ability to beat chronic diseases, such as the success rates of people who have an optimistic mindset to beat cancer, to beat coronary heart disease, to beat type 1 diabetes. You know, when your mind is working the right way and you are positive in your approach, then that manifests itself in how you're able to react to these setbacks. And that was pretty amazing. And even physical injuries as well. The rehabilitation for physical injuries is a lot shorter, it tends to be, if the mind is in the right place, if you have that optimistic mindset. The second thing that I guess was found was a greater achievement by people who are optimists in life generally. They achieve more, they aim for more, and they are fixated on achieving that much more because they think they can, right? They're looking at the solutions, they're looking at how to move forward, and that really allows them to achieve a lot more. Even in times when it's tough, you know, they're looking for ways out. And a lot of the research really that was done in this space was around sportsmen. And we know a lot of the very successful sportsmen over a prolonged period of time generally have a very, very solid, strong mindset and are optimists. I think one thing that sort of screams out at me is an article I was very, very recently reading around Jurgen Klopp, who is the manager of Liverpool Football Club. Now, this football club, it's a bad example for Manchester United fans, I accept, but it's a fact, so I'm just using it. So the Liverpool Football Club this year have achieved what probably not many top or no top flight football teams have done, which is the record that the amount of wins and the points tally, etc., that was achieved, I guess, until COVID came in the tracks. But one of the players of Liverpool Football Club was asked, how have you managed to achieve these results? And his response to that was that even when we're losing, he makes us see a way. See a way that we're going to win. So he never really knows when we've lost, and so we play to the final whistle when everything is completely outside of our control. So the point is that, again, this is the mindset of an optimist, that, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to make a way of doing this, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to achieve. And that's exactly what optimists tend to do. And the last thing I would say connected to this really is persistence. That optimistic people tend to be far more persistent in what they want to achieve. And even if they have a setback, even if they go down, they will come back again, right? We have examples all around us of people who were conventionally, I guess, in our society seen as successful businessmen, millionaires, billionaires. You've got, I guess, one of the stark examples comes to mind is Richard Branson. We all know him as the multimillionaire that we've probably seen growing up. but he's had 15 businesses that have failed. A lot of his initial businesses did fail as well. So, but he's picked himself up from that and gone again. Another example, and probably a very, very unpopular example, is Donald Trump, right? But the fact of the matter is that, you know, he is where he is. He's seen as a billionaire globally, etc. The reality is that he's had 6 businesses that have filed for bankruptcy, right, over a certain period of time. But you know, as I said, if anything, he's an optimist, right? Love him or hate him, or say whatever you want about him. But he is an optimist, and he is in what people consider to be the world's most powerful seat, right? So again, you know, picking yourself up when you're down, through your optimism, through your positive thinking, is a great asset to have. Thomas Edison, we know him as the inventor of the light bulb. And the story goes that the light bulb was invented on the 1,000th attempt. And so one of the reporters, he asked him, he said, how did it feel to fail 1,000 times before you got here? And he turned it around. He said, well, I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was the invention of 1,000 steps. So the point being, again, semantics, your thought process, how you are able to make something which seems negative into something positive. Very, very important. But again, seen as a great quality. And I can certainly say for myself in my line of work, when we interview people for jobs and we give them scenario-based questions, that's exactly what we're looking for. How would you react in the face of adversity? How are you going to look for a way out? Are you going to basically stop if you've had adversity, if you haven't got the result that you were looking for? Or are you going to keep moving on? Are you going to try and maneuver? You're going to improvise? Are you going to think positively? You're going to have an optimistic outset? And when we find those individuals, we hire them, because those are the type of people that you'd want in your team. Those are the type of people that are going to become leaders. So in a nutshell, clearly, as I said, it's not something that we have to really think too hard about, but optimism is a healthy trait to have. It's a very healthy characteristic to harbor. Now, bringing that back down to our Deen of Islam, really having an optimistic mindset is, I would say, a concept which has deep roots within our Aqidah as Muslims, our creed as Muslims. And really that comes from our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he means to us. And knowing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to us and what he can do for us, and the power and majesty of Allah in and of itself should really make us all optimists. And this concept is called husn al-dhanni billah, you know, having a good opinion of Allah, knowing Allah, and knowing that we should always expect good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I am, in the Hadith Qudsi, as we know, that I am as my slave thinks of me, and I am with him when he calls upon me, right? And again, this is really, I say this a lot, to be honest with you. This is why it's so important that we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know the Asma wa Sifat, we know his names and attributes, right? Because only when we know someone will our dependency on them increase, will our relationship, will them truly build. When we do some mentoring courses, when we go through work, we go to some schools sometimes, we ask them questions, we ask them about, you know, who is the most important person? You know, who do you love the most? And they will invariably, the younger children will say, my mum. Why do you love your mum so much? Well, because she cooks for me, and she gives me sweets, and she comes and picks me up from school, and she gives me cuddles, and she gives me kisses, but X, Y, Z. And they know their dependency on their mothers. They know the relationship they have. And that's what builds their love for them, their dependency on them, and everything that goes around that. It nurtures that relationship. In a very similar but much broader way, we need to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means to us. And that will feed our optimism. When we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the beneficent, the most merciful, the one who is Al-Fattah, the one that will open the doors when the doors are all shut, Al-Rashid, Al-Hadi, the one that will give us direction when we're lost. You know, Al-Wudud, the one that loves us the most. If we know that he is the one that loves us the most, how can we ever sit and think that he's going to do something which is going to be negative for us, right? Ar-Razaq, he's the one who has written our rizq is written, and he is the one who's going to provide it from us, even no matter how hard done by we are in terms of our financial situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Talaq in the 3rd verse that He will provide from you from sources that you can't even imagine, as long as you have tawakkul and you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we really need to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and optimism will become second nature to us, because we will know that we are asking the one in whose hands is everything. And He is the one who loves us more than anybody could love us. He is the most just. He is al-Hakam al-Adl. He is the judge and the just, right? And whatever He will do will be correct and right. And when you have that straight in your mind, then you will never be pessimistic again. We will never be pessimistic as Muslims again. So it's imperative that we try and build our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because without that, we leave ourselves short in how we should be thinking as Muslims. Now, optimism and this understanding obviously was inherent within the prophets that went before us. The messengers and the prophets who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent had this perfect understanding of Allah and what He meant to us and what He can do for us, and the fact that everything is within His hands. And that manifested itself in many, many different ways in stories that we get from their lives. If you think of Musa alayhi salam, the very famous story of when they're being chased by Fir'aun and the people of Fir'aun, the toughest army of the time. And Musa alayhi salam has got a handful of people of the Bani Israel. They come with him. They're standing in front of the sea, in front of the Red Sea with their belongings, and there just seems to be no outlet for them. And Musa alayhi salam, with his tawakkul, with his optimism, he strikes his staff on the ground and the sea parts, and they go through. And when Fir'aun and his men try and come through, they're submerged by the water and they're killed. That was the optimism of Musa alayhi salam, the trust that he had in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that allowed him to do that. Similarly, you think of Nuh alayhi salam. I guess, the prophet that, Allahu alam, I think he lived the longest, they say. In some narrations, they say he lived for 950 years. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma and Ikrimah radiallahu an, they have reported, he said he lived even longer, up to 1700 years. They say that he lived and he preached and he kept on preaching, he kept on preaching and spreading the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one generation would go and one people would go, and they would tell the next people that were coming after him, don't believe in him, don't give up on your gods, don't take his message. He speaks falsehood, don't take from him. But he kept on giving them the message. And at the end of those 950 or 1050 or 1700 years that have been reported, there were a handful of believers that he had, no more than that. But that didn't stop him from being optimistic. That didn't stop him from continuing and persistently carrying on. Why? Because he knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's going to make things happen. And our aqidah, our belief as a Muslim, is the fact that everything is in the hands of Allah. We just have to keep on making the effort. Now I come to, I guess, the most perfect, it is definitely the most perfect of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and possibly the things that the Prophet ﷺ saw in his lifetime, the difficulties that he saw within his lifetime, are difficulties that not anybody else has ever seen. His father passed away before he was able to even meet him. His mother passed away when he was 6 years old. Some say in some narrations that it was in front of him. We know that his wife passed away, Khadija radiallahu anha, his most beloved wife, she passed away. His uncles, companions that would come out with him to the battlefield were martyred onto the battlefield, who came out with him for the sake of Allah. He saw them with his eyes, he picked them up, he buried them with his eyes. His children, one of the most difficult things, may Allah protect us, to do is to bury a child. 5 of his 6 children in his lifetime passed away. You think about him being ostracized from his society. He was loved by everybody. Al-Emaan, right? He was the truthful one, and then all of a sudden everybody hated him. They hit him with stones, they struck him, they threw him out of their cities. In the latter parts of his life, he was poisoned. And yet, as is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he would say, I love optimism. This is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, I love optimism. I love looking up. I love to be positive. you know, despite all of the different setbacks that he had throughout his life. And we could spend hours, days, years talking about them. But he was optimistic, and he was always optimistic. And he carried on. Why? Because he knew he had this, the husn dhanni billah, embedded within his heart. He knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was all he needed. And there are various examples in his lifetime, and we'll go through a few of them. If you think about the Battle of Badr, you know, where it looks like there is absolutely no hope, no reason to continue. In the Battle of Badr, the Muslims didn't ask for the war, it just happened. It just so happened that they found themselves in a war with 313 men standing against a sophisticated, fully equipped army of more than 1,000 with weapons, with animals, with you name it, everything that you can think of. And the Muslims have got not even a handful, not even five adequate animals to be able to travel on. 313 of them barely resourced, and they're standing opposite each other. But the Prophet ﷺ led them into that war. He made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the night before, as we know, and it's a long dua, but he made dua to Allah and he said, Ya Allah, if these men, these believers are to perish, then who will be left to worship you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to that. And they moved forward optimistically. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in Surah Imran. He said, we sent down 5,000 angels to help them. You know, and they went forward and they annihilated the enemy. You know, it was such a huge victory. Muslims lost 14 of their companions. 70 of the companions on the other side were taken as prisoners of war. And all the war booty came, and alhamdulillah, this was a life victory to the Muslims because their leader was at the forefront. And he was optimistic and he believed in the promise of Allah and what Allah is capable of. Similar with at the Battle of the Confederates. This was probably stark, even worse than the situation in the Battle of Badr. You had 10,000 of the enemy who were lining up outside Medina. And not even that, there was a section of the Muslims, the Bani Qurayza, who had actually rebelled, right? They had defected and they had gone with the enemy, and they gave them access to the city of Medina. Now the Muslims are trying to build a trench around the city to prevent the enemies to get in. This, as I said, there's 10,000 of them. How do you do this? And in the middle of this effort, there's a huge stone that they find, and the companions just can't get through it. They can't break it. And the Prophet ﷺ can see this, that, you know, that they seem to be getting stuck, right? And so immediately what he does is he jumps to the fore himself and he strikes the stone. He says, Bismillah, and he strikes the stone. And he says, Allahu Akbar, I can see Syria has been given to me, and I can see the red gates of the city from here. And then he struck the stone again and said, Bismillah. And then another portion of the stone broke. So now he's broken 2/3 of the stone. And he shouted out, he said, Allahu Akbar, I can see Persia, and the keys of Persia have been given to me. Wallahi, I can see the white gates of the city from here. Now the companions are looking at this, and they're obviously getting a lift from this. And then he said, Bismillah, and he struck the stone a 3rd time. And the entire stone broke. And he said, Allahu Akbar, Wallahi, I have been given the keys to Yemen, and I can see the gates of Sana'a from here. And the stone was broken, and the spirits of each of those companions was lifted. And the companions and the Muslim army went forward, and they fought that battle and were given victory by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again. This was in the depth of the night. This was in the cold, when, you know, everything looked really negative. The outlook was really down. But the Prophet ﷺ was as I said, he was the biggest of optimists. When he saw that his companions, their heads were dropping, he was the one at the forefront. He jumped in. He did what he needed to do. He broke that stone and he lifted their heads. How many of you have been in a situation, I certainly have, where you seem like you've hit a bit of a brick wall, and there might be somebody in the group who just says an optimistic word. Don't worry, it'll be okay. Honestly, it will be fine. There's no logic to that. There's no logic that they've given, but they've just said it's going to be okay. And what that does to your heart, the impact that it has, is phenomenal, right? So even psychologically, you need to be that person. You need to be that person that is going to be at the forefront, inshallah. And really, as I said, be that optimist that pulls everybody along. And that is the role of a Muslim. And just a couple of individual examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. One where we know the story about when he migrated from Makkah to Medina. And again, at this point of the story, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was with him, and they both took shelter in Ghar al-Thawr, and we know that the Quraysh were pursuing them, they were following them. And literally they were at a point where Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he said to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, he said that if they as much as look down, you know, then they will see us. And there was a concern in the heart of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. He said, you know, if they simply look down, they're going to see us and they'll find us. And then, you know, obviously there's really negative consequences of that. And the Prophet ﷺ replied to him, he said, what do you think of Abu Bakr? Of the two that are in the cave, the third of whom is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he told him and he calmed him down. And that's exactly what happened. They didn't see the Prophet ﷺ. They didn't see Abu Bakr. They just moved away and they went along. In that situation where literally any of us, if we think about it, you're thinking to yourself, this is it. You know, we're cornered, we're done for. The Prophet ﷺ has a completely different way of thinking, a completely positive way of thinking, a completely optimistic way of thinking, and how to deal with that situation. The incident narrated in Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ was lying one afternoon under a tree, and he had his sword hanging to the side of him. And a Bedouin came and he grabbed the sword and he held it over the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "Oh Muhammad, who is going to save you from me now?" And the Prophet ﷺ looked up and he said, "Allah will save me." And the sword fell out the hand of the Bedouin and fell into the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. Subhanallah. That is what you call the height of optimism, brothers and sisters. That is what we need to have embedded in our minds as a mindset, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that we rely upon and call upon by all his names. And he is the one who is going to do what he does, and it is always going to be for the best. And if you have that mindset, you will never fall. You will never be a pessimistic. You will never get left behind. Now, I guess some of the things that we should bear in mind are that while we obviously, as Muslims, as I said, we should always be optimists. We should always be on the front foot. We should always think of the good. We should always think positively of Allah, and what the consequences are going to be of any situation are going to be good. There are steps that we can take, inshallah. We shouldn't be what they call irrational optimists. An irrational optimist is, for example, somebody who goes to the edge of a cliff and jumps down and says, Allah will save me, right? No, it's not like that. We need to have a method to our approach. And the method to our approach, is for every Muslim is, I would say, twofold, right? In order to be optimistic, there's two things that we absolutely have to do. One of the first things, the first thing that we absolutely have to do is make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have tawakkul in him, right? Now this sounds really obvious. And many of you will hear this and think, well, obviously that is the case. But there are so many occasions that I can outline where somebody will come to you with an issue or a problem and they'll ask you for advice and what should I do and where should I go and how should we deal with this? And you say to them, make dua to Allah, make dua as a starting point. And they'll be like, yeah, I know that, of course, yeah, but give me a solution, right? That almost gets put onto the back burner. That's almost an afterthought. I'll make dua, fine. But give me a solution. And in your effort of finding a solution, you forget to make dua. We go and look at people. We shouldn't obviously. But dua is something without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will not achieve whatever we are looking to achieve, no matter how optimistic we might be of achieving it, no matter how obvious it may seem that this is going to happen. Without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is not going to happen. So first and foremost, make sure that you are making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands this. It's not even just something that we should do. Allah says, قَالَ رَبَّكُمُ ادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. Your Lord has said, ask me and I will give to you. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِي سَيَدْخُلُونَ جَهَنَّمَ دَاخِرِينَ. That those who are too arrogant to ask me will be thrown into the hellfire humiliated. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the facility to talk to him. We have a direct communication channel with Allah. We need to make the most of that. We need to make sure that we ask him and he will respond to that. And when we ask him, we should ask him in a way And this is an etiquette of dua, by the way, brothers and sisters. We should ask him in a way where we are absolutely positive that he's going to respond. And not ask him in a way where, Ya Allah, if you will, then make this happen. No, ask him in a certain way, because you know that he is the one who owns all might and majesty. You know that he is the one who can make anything happen. There is no such thing as impossible with Allah. So ask him in that way and make sure that you're doing that. The Prophet ﷺ said, there is nothing that changes qadr or fights qadr the way dua fights qadr. So even if something is written in qadr, it can change because of your dua. SubhanAllah, amazing, amazing. If something is written in your qadr and you make dua, it can change because of your dua, if it's accepted. And he said, nothing prolongs the completion of that hadith, and nothing prolongs your life like charity, right? So, so number one, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as I said, ask for the biggest of big things. Ask for as much as you would like. Ask for anything and everything, right? No matter how much a thing is looking unlikely, if you want to achieve that, remain optimistic and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, which was narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri in the collection of Imam Ahmad, he said to the Sahaba, he said to them, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything in dua, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will respond to everything. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhuma, they said, Ya Rasulullah, they said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to respond to everything, إِذَنْ نَسْتَكْثِرْ. In that case, we're going to ask him we're going to keep on asking him and asking him and asking him. You know, he's going to give us everything. We're going to keep on asking him, right? And always surprised. And the Prophet ﷺ smiled. And he said, Allahu Akbar. He smiled and he said, Allahu Akbar, which means Allah is greater than what you can ever imagine. Allah is beyond what you can ever imagine. You know? So why limit ourselves? Why limit ourselves in what we're asking? Ask for the biggest and the boldest of things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that he can give it to you. So that is the first condition of being an optimist. And just also know that it takes nothing away from Allah. Nothing away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter how mad something sounds that you may ask for, it takes nothing away from the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As he says in the Hadith Qudsi, when which has been narrated, if the first of you and the last of you, the jinn of you, the man of you, the men of you, the women of you, the believers, the non-believers of you, were to stand on a plane and ask me for everything you'd ever wanted, and I was to give you everything at the same time, it would not take away from my majesty as much as a needle would if it was dipped into the ocean and extracted. And even that, the scholars say, that's figurative. You know, it takes nothing away from the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if he was to give you everything that you can ever imagine. So do not hesitate and do not hold back in the dua that you're making to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask him knowing that he can give you anything that he wants, and use the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make that dua. So that's the first point about being optimistic, is make sure that you are communicating with Allah, make sure that you are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's actually going to make this happen. The second point about being optimistic, brothers and sisters, is, and again, this is going to sound obvious, take the action to change your situation, right? Do whatever you need to do. Make dua to Allah, and then make the asbab, make the reason, make the different avenues and conduits. Do what you need to do to achieve whatever you are trying to achieve with that optimistic mindset. You can't just sit in a place and expect your situation to change without actually pursuing it by doing something. And this is not the way of our deen, right? We all know the famous hadith, which is reported by Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, where the person came to Prophet ﷺ and said to him, Ya Rasulullah, should I tie my camel, or should I just leave it loose and have tawakkul on Allah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, tie your camel and then have tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the point is that we have to make sure that we take an action, and we are making dua at the same time, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, enable us to achieve what we want to achieve. And the reason why I say this is, again, because there are so many scenarios where you will talk to individuals and they say, I'm really looking for a job, I haven't got a job, really difficult situation, and I need to get out of this. And you know, well, are you applying? Are you actually making contact with any recruiters? Are you applying? Are you doing, well, I send about 4 applications a day. I mean, this is an environment where you've got more than 100 people applying for a job. You can't do that. That's not, this is, you know, something which is, we've got to be far more involved. You know, we've got to be far, if you're trying to cure yourself of an illness, You've got to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you've got to listen to the doctors. You've got to take your medication with the discipline that it's supposed to be taken. You can't just expect you're just magically going to have your situation change. So optimism requires action as well at the same time. And procrastination is a great illness. Procrastination on a matter is something which is actually been addressed by our deen, where because of procrastination, because of staying within our comfort zones, we don't get things done, right? Whether that be in what we're trying to achieve in life or whatever else it might be, we don't get it done because we procrastinate. The Prophet ﷺ gave us an immense dua for procrastination. Is a gift that we gave to every single one of us. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazn wa ajzi wal-kasal wa jubni wal-bukhl wa ghalabati ad-dayni wa qahri ar-rijal. So he told the companion to ask Allah for refuge from sadness and depression, from laziness and procrastination, from cowardice and miserliness, and then from being overcome by men and being overcome by debt. This is a dua that I really recommend every single one of us should memorize and we should use all the time. Ask Allah to protect us from procrastination, because we will never get anything done. You know, you can be as optimistic as you like, but you have to change your situation. You can't procrastinate. Have big goals, big objectives, and then act upon what needs to be done. Take the steps to get you from where you are to where you want to be as well, inshallah. So that's really, really, all of this is really important. And one final thing I would say, which is very, very important as well, is really, inshallah, surround yourself by optimistic people. Really important. Surround yourself by optimistic people, because you've got yes men, I would call them, and not in the conventional sense, as you know, yes, we can do this. Yes, it can be done. As opposed to those who are the other way. I mean, you want to be with people who see opportunities even within their setbacks, and not really with people who see setbacks within even the opportunities that are looking them in the face, who are overly cautious, who are overly prudent. Yes, we should be rational about the way we move forward, but you'd rather be with people who are optimistic, see the bigger picture, and aim high. Because again, this is how we've been trained to be by our deen, by the Prophet ﷺ, by the companions that came after him, and the prophets that came before him. So we should aspire to be amongst those, inshallah. So just bringing this back down to what I said at the beginning, optimism, and looking at it from a slightly different angle. I think it's important to bring it down to the mentality I said that really sort of spurred me on to have this conversation, which was around what are we going to do this Ramadan? We have got a month of Ramadan to go. The masajid are closed. We're not going to have any duroos. We're not going to be able to do iftar with our loved ones and our community, etc. There was a real sort of worry that came across at the beginning of the month. Anxiety almost that people were displaying. But I mean, really, I would say, alhamdulillah, this has been such a unique Ramadan, all within the plan of Allah, such a unique Ramadan, where because of our situation, us as a community and us as individuals have had to think outside the box, get outside of our comfort zones, and really push ourselves, right? And credit goes to individuals. I guess we are here sitting here as a result of that outside of the box thinking, like Al-Emaan and many other masajid who've put online platforms together, where now you're not necessarily going to the masjid, but the outreach of the masjid is coming into your house. And maybe there are other people in your house who are benefiting from it who wouldn't have otherwise, right? You are getting to enjoy durus and lectures from not just one masjid, but if it's recorded from other masajid as well, right? So it's forced us as a community to organize ourselves and think differently. Even for us individually, as I said, how many of us used to go into Taraweeh and just sort of stand at the back and take part in that whole, in the salah. But without the ability to be able to do that, it's forced us to get out of the back seat of the car and get into the driving seat and drive ourselves. Pick up that Quran, lead your families in salah yourself, lead yourself in Taraweeh yourself. What a nurturing experience that has been. And so many people that I've spoken to this Ramadan have said it's been one of the most uplifting Ramadans that they've had. Even with the iftars that we've missed as a community, yes, there's a lot of benefit in them, but so many times you end up missing the night prayer because of the iftar that goes on for such a long period of time, etc. So it's really, we should And this should be an example for us of how we should always remain optimistic, because there were those who were optimistic at the beginning of Ramadan. And for alhamdulillah, because of their optimism, they've ended up in a place where they've had a fulfilling Ramadan, right? And then may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it. But the fact is that we've had to really, as I said, be proactive. Be proactive in a way that we may not have necessarily had to be in the Ramadans that have passed before. And that is something that we should carry with us and take with us. And the reality of the situation was, brothers and sisters, if the masajid were closed, this was all, as I said, within the plan of Allah. But it didn't change anything for us individually. It shouldn't have changed anything for us individually. As to quote the Imam of the Masjid al-Aqsa, when he was asked about this by one of our colleagues in an interview, around the fact that masajid are closed and how does he feel and all the rest of that, before the starting of Ramadan. And he gave a beautiful quote. He says that the doors of the masjid may be closed, but the doors of Jannah are always open. And the dua is accepted and the salah is accepted, whether it is prayed in your home or whether it's prayed in the masjid. So that was really something for us to hold on to, and that's exactly what's transpired over this month as well. So the point is, this is one example for us where we had that concern and fear, that really we should have been positive about it. The other thing also is, I would say really quickly, just before I conclude, is 2 reasons that the Prophet ﷺ has left us, amongst many reasons, why we should be optimistic about the reward that bi'idhnillah we will receive from this Ramadan and the fasting that we've done and everything that we've done within it. And in order to be able to, I guess, make that point, I just wanted to share a personal story, and it will make sense as we go along. Last year, towards the end of the summer, I was traveling for work and got to the airport, Gatwick, and there was an hour to go to the flight, so we were called to the boarding gates. I've gone to the boarding gate. We've sat there, and all of a sudden we hear that there's a fault in the plane, and the flight is going to be delayed. So we sit for another hour. Now it's hot. People are getting really uncomfortable. There are kids. Another hour goes past, and now we've been delayed for 3 hours. Children are crying. People are getting very restless. When you go to the departure gates, there's no restaurants or shops or anything where you can sort of spend sort of killing time. Whatever you want to call it, get yourself some food or refreshments, none of that. You're just sitting there in this one spot with your kids or with your luggage in this heat, getting more and more frustrated. And now more than 4, almost 5 hours had passed when one of the airline staff, they came up and she said that we're happy to inform you that we're going to be taking off soon. So we'll start boarding very shortly. We will ask passengers for the first and business class to come forward to board first. Now, I was traveling with work. When you travel with work over a certain distance, you get a certain class. It's policy you have to get a certain class of seat. So I'm pulling my luggage now, going to the front, thanking Allah that this 4 hours has come to an end. But I can see the hateful glares around me of everybody sitting around me. People with children, people who've been sitting there for so long are sort of anxious and restless, and they're looking at you and really in an envious way, with glaring stares. And you just look down and you just sort of go into your own sort of world, and you just maneuver through all of them. Go, and I got my passport checked. We'll step into the plane, the air conditioning hits you, they give you a glass of juice, you sit in your seat, and they give you snacks, etc. And alhamdulillah, everything is okay again. It resets itself, right? Now, at the time, I thought to myself, because it's an interesting experience, it made me think at the time of the hadith of Rasulullah that he said about one of the gates of Jannah. And there is no comparison, by the way, between these 2 scenarios. But the Prophet ﷺ, maybe just loosely, if you get where we were, the Prophet ﷺ said that in Jannah there is a gate which is called Ar-Rayyan, and through that gate the people who have fasted will enter on the day of judgment, and no one else shall enter alongside them. It will be asked, where are the Sa'imun who fasted? And they will walk through it, and upon the entry of the last of them, it will be locked, and no one else will walk through it. And this is an agreed upon hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. The gate of Ar-Rayyan, on the day of judgment. On the day of judgment, brothers and sisters, any of you who have studied the day of judgment know the horrors, may Allah protect us, that day involves. On the day where We will be standing for 50,000 years, stark naked, not being able to recognize any of our brothers and sisters or anybody we knew. We won't recognize anybody around us, not our children. Standing there with the sun a mile above our heads, drowning in our sweat, looking at all the prophets, going from one prophet to another prophet, begging them to intercede with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to start the day of judgment, seeing no hope. May Allah protect us and not let us be amongst those. But this day when there will be restless, it will be a restlessness that you can't even imagine, things that we can't even think about. On that day, a gate will open, as Prophet ﷺ has promised us. And this gate will be the gate of Ar-Rayyan. And the caller will call all those people who fasted. And he will tell them to enter. And that, brothers and sisters, is you. That, brothers and sisters, is your families. That is all of us who fasted. Inshallah, bi-idhnillah, if Allah accepts how fast we make the dua that He does, and He perfects them and He accepts them, that's every single one of us who will walk through those gates and leave people behind. And when we enter, it's not going to be some ordinary air conditioning or some glass of juice or some comfortable seat. It's going to be things that we can't even imagine. Things that we can't even imagine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ ثُمَّ رَأَيْتَ نَعِيمًا وَمُلْكًا كَبِيرًا. That everywhere they will see a great dominion and pleasures. Things that our minds are too constricted to even think about. That is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised you for fasting. So be optimistic about that reward from Allah. Be optimistic about that. And very, very lastly, the hadith from Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anhu. When he mentions the story, and this is in Ibn Majah, he mentions the story of two men that became Muslim at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of them was very active. And he used to go out in the way of Allah. He would go out a lot in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he would fight in the way of Allah. He was really active in the community, whereas the other one was quite passive. He would stay back. He would sit back, and he was a Muslim, alhamdulillah, but he didn't really go out in the way of Allah. And it just so happened that one year, the companion that would go out in the way of Allah passed away. And 1 year after, roughly, the other companion, who was a bit more passive, he also passed away as well, right? So they'd both become Muslim at the time of Rasulullah. The one who would go out in the way of Allah passed away first, and then the one who was more passive died about a year later. Now, Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anhu, he says, I had a dream. He said, in that dream, he said, I was standing at the gates of Jannah, and I was standing with these two men next to me. Both of these men were standing next to me. And the angel came, the caller came, and he first came, and he took the passive companion, the one who didn't go out in the way of Allah, with him into Jannah. Then he came back out, and he took the martyr into Jannah, second. And then he came back out, and he addressed me, and he said, go back, as it's not your time. So Talha ibn Ubaydullah woke up from this dream, and he shared it with the companions, and the companions heard this, and they were quite surprised. They were, perplexed, and there was a bit of commotion, and the word got to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ asked them what happened, and they explained. He said, Ya Rasulullah, he had this dream that he saw both of these companions that we know of who died, and the shaheed was taken into Jannah second, and the one who was passive, who died a year later, was taken into Jannah first. So the Prophet ﷺ said, why are you surprised? And they said, Ya Rasulullah, he died a martyr. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and the other one just didn't do much. And the Prophet ﷺ said, did the other companion not live a year longer? And they said, yes, yeah, they agreed, yes, he did. And the Prophet ﷺ said, well, didn't he live one more Ramadan? Didn't he fast so many fasts? Didn't he do so many sujood? Didn't he do so much ibadat in that Ramadan? More than the other. And they said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, he did. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the difference between them is the difference between the heavens and the earth. And by the way, brothers and sisters, this is not to take anything away from the companion who was a shaheed. We know the reward for the shuhada. We know how they will be raised in the akhirah. This is not for that. This is to elevate the status of those who fast in the month of Ramadan and do ibadah in the month of Ramadan. So be optimistic, brothers and sisters. Make dua to Allah to accept your fasting, accept your du'as, accept your ibadat, everything, all your worship that you've done in this month. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are sure of it, inshallah. We are sure of it. We are sure of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us these rewards in the akhirah as He can. And He will perfect the frailties and the imperfections within our worship and accept it within His majesty. And we will see the reward of it, no doubt. So brothers and sisters, in conclusion, always be optimistic. Always be optimistic, as our Deen has taught us. There have been examples that I could talk about all day long, right? From our Aqidah, from the lives of the companions and the lives of the Prophet ﷺ and the prophets. The operative message is you have to make sure that you understand that we always should be optimistic. Why? Because anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does has khair in it. Anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does has khair in it. And even what I was saying before in conclusion, if you don't get the result that you were looking for, if you are optimistic, you made dua, you did everything that you were supposed to do, and still Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed something different to what you were asking for, then you should have the trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done what is best for you, without a shadow of a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt. And you would still be positive, and you would still remain optimistic. Whatever He has done is for the best, even if I don't understand it, even if I didn't see it. وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. And we do not, and they will not encompass anything of our knowledge except what we permit them to. We say this in Ayatul Kursi every day. So know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done something which is good for you and saved you from a calamity, even if you didn't understand it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to be the ultimate optimists, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to understand Him and His majesty and our relationship with Him completely and live our lives by that, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك واشهد ان لا اله الا انت واستغفرك واتوب اليك. جزاك الله خير.
Jazakallah khair for your lucid talk on optimism, Viqas. I have to say, I love the fact that you used Liverpool FC as an example. I'm very optimistic that they will be awarded the championship, inshallah.
The du'as are there, and the Premier League is taking the action, so inshallah it will happen.
Inshallah. We've got some questions through on the chat now, so I'll just start with those.
Yeah.
First one is, Salam Ustaddh, I pray, but I cannot help it if I'm lazy in life and very lazy in my religion. What can I do to make myself better? I also panic a lot and suffer from anxiety. What else can I read?
Okay, so as I said, laziness, procrastination is really something which is spoken about at length in our Deen, and this is why we've been given the antidote for that as well. Number one, what I would say is as I said before, make dua to Allah, and make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you the vigor, to give you the capacity to be able to change the situation. The dua that I mentioned before, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazn wal-'ajzi wal-kasal wa-jubni wal-bukhl, this is something which is readily available. Look it up, inshallah. Make sure that you continuously say this dua. And really, number one, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change that situation. With your ibadat, brothers and I wasn't sure if it's a brother or a sister. We've got to differentiate between the nafal salah, the nafal ibadat, right, which are the supererogatory ibadat, the sunan as well, and the fara'id, right, the obligatory ibadah that we have. The obligatory ibadah, the salah that we have to pray 5 times a day, the siyam the fasting that we have to do, the zakah that we have to give, hajj if we're able to, inshallah. There is no option around this, brothers and sisters. I do not mean to say this in a harsh way. There is no option around this, right? We can't choose to do this or not choose to do this. And I guess I give context to this in a way where I would say that there are many things in life that we have to do that we may not enjoy doing or may be difficult for us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us worshipping Him the most beloved thing to us. But when we're not there, we may not be there. It may be something which is difficult for us to, just as you've said, just know that we don't have a choice in it. You know that you don't have a choice in, if you're working somewhere, you know that you don't have a choice in, usually, I should say, not in this lockdown situation, but getting on that train and going into work and being at your desk at 9, you don't have a choice. You may not like doing it, especially in the winter when it's really, really cold, but you'll do it. Why? Because you don't have a choice. You know, how many of us love, I hate to give this analogy because, as I said, may Allah make our hearts full of the love to worship him. But when we're lazy and we're procrastinating around ibadah, you know, you've got to bear in mind, we don't have a choice in it. How many of us love paying our taxes? We have to do it. We have to do it, right? If you don't do it, there's a consequence. And that consequence drives us to make sure that we have paid our taxes on time, make sure that we are at work on time at 9 o'clock or whatever it is, in case we get sacked by our bosses or in case we get pursued by HMRC, but we're going to do it because we don't have a choice. Equally, brothers and sisters, in fara'id, we don't have a choice. So please, please try and remember that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of resurrection, the first question we are going to be asked is about our salah. How did you pray? And this is by the consensus of many scholars. How did you pray? How was your salah? And they say that as the hadith goes, if that is in order, everything will be in order. And if that isn't in order, then, you know, we will be in trouble. May Allah protect us. So, you know, my advice to the brother or the sister would be that in terms of your laziness around ibadat, especially around worship, you know, make sure that you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to soften your heart. And the first thing I will say is, brother, the fact that you are actually pointing this out is a blessing from Allah, because there are many, many people who don't worship, who don't pray, and they are not even conscious of it. So the fact that you have this conscience is in and of itself a blessing from Allah. Number two, reach out to Allah and ask him to change your situation. As I said, being lazy, procrastination, all the rest of it. And number three, as I said, always keep an eye on the consequence. Always keep an eye on the consequence, because we are all going towards that consequence. We will all stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no doubt about that on the day of resurrection, and we will answer to him. If you know, and if you've studied in your life, you would have studied for an exam, knowing you're going to sit that exam. And that day of the exam is what makes you study. And that's exactly what we need to think about here as well. We are going to have that exam with Allah. And the preparation for that exam is now. Once we've gone into our graves, there's no more time left. So, you know, please, please make dua for yourself. Change your situation actively. Ask for protection from the shaitan, because procrastination comes from the shaitan. And as I said, you know, think of the consequence of not doing your ibadat. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy for you.
Jazakallah khair, Viqas. Next question is around the subject of time. So what advice do you have for the optimist who runs out of time, mainly due to family, extended family and work, etc., have a huge list of things still to complete?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there are some techniques we talk about in terms of being productive in the city. Time is a commodity which we speak about a lot. It's finite, and there's only so many things you can do. But to be honest with you, one of the things I would say is we have been highly encouraged to look at our scholars, our ulama, our shuyukh, etc., with respect to how they use their time. And wallahi, I would say that I am astonished, and I don't say this lightly and not just for the sake of this conversation, how some of them are able to use their time in such an effective way. They have families, they have responsibilities, some of them have jobs, of course, as well, alongside what they're doing. But the amount they're able to get done is phenomenal. So when you are trying to do something for the sake of Allah, Allah puts barakah in your time. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will put barakah in your time. And you will realize that as you go along. But some practical things I would absolutely say, which we know will help you get through a lot more, right? Are things like making lists of what you want to get done. And the other thing that often happens is that you can take on too much at the same time. So you've got maybe 10 or 15 things on your list, whereas you should probably have 3 or 5 or 6. It's better to achieve that subset than try and go for the ultimate entirety and get that done in a good and effective way than try and conquer the world and basically get nothing done. So I would really say organize yourselves, know from beforehand, inshallah, what you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to achieve it. You know, pick your battles, and you will win that war. And of course, as I said, make dua to Allah to put barakah in your time. And inshallah, bi'idhnillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. If you're not able to do something, don't kill yourself about it. You know, inshallah, if you put a structure around things, it will, you know, things will fall into place themselves. But, you know, as I said, prioritize, pick your battles, and make dua to Allah, and inshallah, bi'idhnillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in your time.
Jazakallah khair, Viqas. There was a request for the dua, I think, on procrastination. if you could slowly repeat that and perhaps even put it in the chat if you get a chance later on. But
well, I absolutely can do. So the dua itself is Allahumma inni a'udhu bika, oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from min al-hammi wal-hazn wal-'ajzi wal-kasl wal-jubni wal-bukhl wa ghalabat ad-dayni wa qahr ar-rijal. Right? So you're asking for protection from sadness and depression, from laziness and procrastination, from jubni al-bukhl, from miserliness and cowardice, and from being overcome by men and being overcome by debt. This was a hadith of Rasulullah where he found a companion who was sitting in the masjid. I believe it was a masjid, I'm pretty sure it was. And he asked him about it, and he looked quite visibly distressed. And he was actually suffering from debts. And I forget the name of the companion. He was suffering from debts, and the Prophet ﷺ gave him this dua to say. And as I said to you, really, for me, this dua covers the entire, the sanctity of an individual. Everything that you want not to be is what you are asking Allah's protection from in this. So you don't want to be cowardly. You don't want to be lazy. You want to be, you don't want to be seen as somebody who's miserly. You don't want to be overcome by other people. You don't want to be in debt. All of this, the sanctity of human life is covered in this one dua. And as I said, inshallah, what I'll do is I'll either put it in the chat or I'll either email it out to you, one or the other. And inshallah, I would highly, highly recommend for everybody to memorize this dua and use it correctly as well. Use it in your sajdas, use it in your sujood, use it in your tashahhud, use it in the preferred times, which we are in right now, right? It's the last hour before Jummah, before Maghrib on a Friday, Jummatul Wida, and in Ramadan. So there's many, many reasons to be positive and make sure that you ask for Allah's protection from this and many other things.
Jazakallah khair, Viqas. I think one of our brothers has kindly posted the transliteration. So for the participant,
Behzat to the rescue, mashallah.
Exactly. He's actually always to the rescue, brother Behzat. So mashallah.
He's taken the edge. He's taken the edge.
That's it.
We procrastinated and he took the edge.
Exactly. He said the dua. So last question from me, actually, Viqas, as a kind of way of summarizing, perhaps. Yep. As Muslim optimists, should we see the glass half full or just full?
We should really, that's a good question. We should, the figure of speech would say the same thing, right? Half full means that you're looking at it positively, and full completely is looking at it positively too. But I guess full completely gives more of a sense of complete assurance and complete optimism. And that's how we should have it. The Prophet ﷺ has said this in a hadith. We know this hadith. It's a very popular hadith in which he said, amazing is the affair of the believer. And it is verily, all of his affairs are good. And this is for no one except for the believer. And he said, if something good happens to him or happiness befalls him, he is grateful and that is good for him. And if something negative befalls him, something of harm befalls him, he is patient and that is good for him. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ has literally, I think this is the answer to your question. The point is we have absolute tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he is going to do for us. And so, as I said before as well, to the eye, even if something happens which seems really negative, we may not understand the wisdom behind that, but we should have that tawakkul. The wisdom behind that is not something that is within our control. We may never understand the wisdom of Allah. What is in our control is to have that tawakkul. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done, he has done it for the best, and have that surety and then move along on that. If I don't see it in this dunya, I will see it in the akhirah. And what I would say as well on it is even in this COVID situation, we've seen and we've heard of some pretty tragic things as would be perceived in the dunya, right? And I don't mean to demean the difficulty and the sadness that many people will have suffered, even at the worst possible outcome, which is the loss of a loved one. But we know ourselves that the Prophet ﷺ said that anybody who passes away through a pandemic or through the plague is going to be amongst and raised with the shuhada, with the martyrs. We know what the reward of the martyrs is. And yes, our eyes will be sad in this dunya when we bid them farewell and they've left us for now. But this dunya is going to be over within 70, 80, 90 years if we're lucky. And when we're raised in the akhirah, we have been told of descriptions of how we will look at those who are raised in the best of ways. And we will look at them, we will envy them, and we will want to be with them. Right? So we've buried them for now, but Allah is going to honor them in the akhirah. Right? So one of what I would say, one of the worst things that we can ever imagine, which is losing a loved one in this dunya through something like COVID, which has probably been the biggest reason for our pessimism. Even in that, there is something that we look forward to in the akhirah, which is so much greater that we can't even imagine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it in the Quran. He says, when he says about when the souls meet each other, and they meet each other with more happiness than a long lost friend or person who may have come after a long time, and how you'd meet them. They meet each other with such happiness in the barzakh. And in the akhirah, like I said, the status that they will have will be envious. So the point, I guess I use that as an example, which is one of the worst things, as I said, that possibly we could think about or conceive as with our human constricted and limited minds. But even in that, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has got something in store for us in the ever never-ending akhirah, which is much greater. And that is something that we should base our judgment on. And yes, so to answer your original question, in any circumstance, provided that we have made dua to Allah, provided that we are worshipping Him and doing what we should do, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, we should have absolute, infallible trust that what He has done is for the absolute best. And that is something which will help us to always think that the glass is always full. The glass is completely full, as he said, not just halfway full, completely full.
Jazakallah khair, Viqas. Lovely explanation there. Last comment coming in. I don't know if you've got any fans watching, but it says, a great speech, you've lost weight.
Camera trick. I'll put it down to cameras, or even the lockdown. I think I'll probably be the only one in lockdown who's ever lost weight, if that is true. But yeah, Jazakallah khair for the observation. I'm glad they took something from the talk.
Fantastic. Okay. So I think on that note, Viqas, it might be a good idea to wrap up now. Could I ask you to finish with a dua?
Of course, yeah, inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulina wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. ربنا هب لنا من ازواجنا وذرياتنا قرة اعين واجعلنا للمتقين اماما ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اللهم تقبل صيامنا وقيامنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair again, Viqas. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening. Love your relaxed style. Inshallah, we'll meet up at the masjid sometime soon, post-lockdown. From myself and Sheikh Viqas, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Ali Taha, and I'm here to talk to you about my personal experience with Al-Emaan Center. For me, Al-Emaan Center has been nothing short of amazing. They have provided me with different kinds of opportunities and helped me to get so many insights into different aspects of life, the likes of which I would not be able to find anywhere else. They have helped me to gain an insight into teaching through some of the many mosque school visits which I have hosted over the years. They have helped me to meet so many new people, all of whom are amazing in their own unique way. It's helped me to learn more about my own religion through the many teachers and speakers and imams and scholars that we've hosted both in the mosque and online, both on a one-off basis and regularly. It is through all of them that I've been able to learn more about Islam and gain some knowledge about the deen. And it is through the many interfaith events that we've held over the years that I have been able to gain some insight into other religions, which has, I believe, given me some sense of open-mindedness, which this ummah so desperately needs. Al-Emaan Center has inspired me in so many ways, and I can spend a long time talking to you about everything that Al-Emaan Center has done for me. I cannot talk about my personal experience with Al-Emaan Center without mentioning the one specific role I had in the mosque, which was that whenever it was time to pray, I would make the adhan and the iqamah, the call to prayer. It was a role which admittedly gave me anxiety, but it has helped me to develop my confidence at the same time. And it is a role which I am very grateful to Al-Emaan Center for giving me. And I hope that as I go on to university in September, I will still be able to play a role in this mosque, which I hold dearly to my heart, no matter how limited that involvement will be. I'd like to thank you, all of you, for giving me the opportunity to meet you all, for you are all very inspiring in your own way. And I hope that before I leave to university in September, I will be able to see the masjid filling up with people once again, whether that's for Jum'ah or by the local community coming for an event. But if not, I would just like to say thank you to all of you for making my experience with Al-Emaan Center one which I will cherish for the rest of my life. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair to Ali for that powerful message in his video. And again, Jazakallah khair to Viqas Sheikh for his lovely talk this afternoon. For those of you interested, do remember that Sheikh Mudaffar Nouri will be reciting at 10 p.m. He intends, inshallah, to finish the Quran. So highly encouraged or highly advise you to tune in for that. But not forgetting the iftar and the dua and azan just before iftar time. So plenty still to come, and hopefully you can make it for those. But for this evening, I'll bid you farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.